Today's story is about a young mechanic whose simple act of kindness changed the life of a billionaire's daughter forever. Stuck in a broken wheelchair on a rainy street, Chloe never expected to meet someone like Jake, a humble 24-year-old mechanic. Watch how one repair sparked trust, joy, and a bond that even her father, a powerful billionaire, couldn't ignore. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. In the quiet suburb of Los Angeles, the late afternoon sun dipped behind rows of modest houses, casting long shadows across the streets. Chloe Morgan, 26, the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest men, rolled slowly along the pavement in her sleek, high-tech wheelchair. She had spent the morning attending meetings, overseeing charity work, and checking on her family's business ventures. Despite her privileged upbringing, Chloe often felt trapped by expectations she hadn't chosen. Today, however, was worse than usual. Her adaptive wheelchair, expensive and state-of-the-art, had suddenly stopped responding as she tried to maneuver into the parking space outside a small, nondescript auto garage. The controls blinked erratically, and the chair refused to move forward. Chloe's heart raced as she struggled to maintain balance, her fingers gripping the joystick tightly. Frustration, embarrassment, and a flicker of panic surged through her. Stranded in front of a garage she had never noticed before, Chloe felt vulnerable in a way she rarely did, exposed without her staff or security nearby. From inside the garage, Jake Carter, a 24-year-old mechanic with grease-stained hands and an ever-present streak of oil on his forehead, noticed her struggle. His small auto shop wasn't much, a single bay tucked between two larger buildings, but it was known in the neighborhood for honest work and skillful repairs. Seeing a young woman in a wheelchair, clearly distressed, Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside. He approached with a careful smile, exuding warmth and sincerity that immediately softened Chloe's initial tension. Despite the stark contrast between her designer outfit and his casual worn clothes, something about his eyes conveyed genuine concern rather than curiosity about her wealth. "Hey, need some help?" he asked, his voice calm but encouraging. Chloe hesitated, a flicker of distrust passing through her mind. People often treated her differently because of her last name, assuming access to her wealth would solve any inconvenience. Yet Jake's demeanor lacked any hint of expectation or entitlement. It was refreshing, and cautiously she nodded. Jake knelt beside the wheelchair, his hands working with deliberate precision. He studied the wiring, the frame, the joystick, and the tiny motors that controlled the chair's complex functions. "Looks like a couple of circuits are shorting and some bolts are loose," he muttered, more to himself than to Chloe. She leaned slightly forward, curiosity overtaking her initial apprehension. As she watched him inspect every component with meticulous care, she began to notice the subtle pride he took in his work, the focus and dedication in every motion. Unlike many professionals she had encountered who often treated expensive equipment as disposable or tedious, Jake seemed to treat this chair as if it were something truly valuable. Hours passed quietly, punctuated by the occasional question from Chloe and patient explanations from Jake. He pointed out parts that had been overlooked in prior maintenance and suggested small adjustments that could enhance stability and maneuverability. Chloe found herself drawn into the process, asking questions she had never thought to ask and listening intently to his responses. There was a humility in Jake that contrasted sharply with the polished, impersonal service she was accustomed to, and it intrigued her. She realized that in this garage, surrounded by the scent of motor oil and the hum of machines, she felt a rare sense of ease. Jake's hands moved deftly, tightening bolts, reconnecting wires, and testing the chair at each stage. "This should give you smoother control, and I'll reinforce the frame so it's easier to turn in tight spaces," he explained. Chloe watched, impressed at his ingenuity. He even adjusted the seat slightly to better support her posture, a small but meaningful enhancement that revealed his attention to detail. She felt a warmth rise within her chest, a rare acknowledgement of someone seeing her as more than just the heir to a fortune. By the time the sun had dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, the chair was fully repaired. Jake gave it a gentle push forward, smiling as it glided smoothly across the pavement. Chloe's eyes widened as she tested the controls, marveling at the responsiveness and ease. The simple act of moving independently, without fear or hesitation, brought a spark of joy that she hadn't felt in months. She laughed softly, a sound she realized she had missed, and looked at Jake with gratitude. You didn't just fix it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You made it feel alive again." Jake shrugged modestly, brushing his hands on his pants. "I just did my job," he replied, though there was a quiet pride in his tone. Chloe shook her head, recognizing that what he had done was far more than mechanical repair. In his careful hands and patient work, he had restored a sense of control and independence that had been missing from her life for far too long. The moment lingered in the soft evening light, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected connection between them. Chloe had come to the garage expecting nothing more than technical help, yet she had found someone whose presence felt oddly comforting. Jake had only meant to assist, but in doing so, he had planted the first seeds of trust and hope in a life often overshadowed by barriers and expectations. As Chloe finally maneuvered her wheelchair out of the garage and onto the quiet street, she glanced back at Jake. "Thank you," she said again, a genuine smile touching her lips. He waved casually, though his eyes reflected the subtle impact of the encounter. Neither spoke of the unspoken understanding forming between them, but both sensed that something extraordinary had begun in that small garage in Los Angeles, a moment where two worlds collided and hearts silently recognized each other amidst tools, grease, and a broken wheelchair. By the time she drove away, Chloe carried with her more than a repaired wheelchair. She carried the realization that kindness, skill, and empathy could exist in the simplest places and from the most unexpected people. Jake, meanwhile, returned to his workbench, feeling a quiet satisfaction, unaware that this brief encounter would mark the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. It was the start of something small yet profound, a connection born from need, nurtured by sincerity, and destined to change both of their lives in ways neither yet fully understood. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Jake's modest garage, casting a golden glow across the cluttered workbenches, scattered tools and faint smell of motor oil. Chloe Morgan, 26, maneuvered her wheelchair along the cracked concrete floor, the soft hum of its motor cutting through the quiet. Today, she wasn't here because her wheelchair needed repair. Jake had already transformed it into a smooth, responsive machine the night before, but because she felt compelled to see him again, to connect with the person who had unexpectedly brought light into her life. Clutching a cup of steaming coffee in her hands, she approached cautiously, aware of the contrast between her expensive designer outfit and Jake's grease-stained clothes. Yet despite the disparity in their worlds, she felt a strange sense of ease. Jake, 24, noticed her immediately as he wiped his hands on a rag and gave a warm smile. The kind of smile that seemed to recognize her as a person rather than the heir to a fortune. "Morning," Jake said casually, though his eyes betrayed a hint of curiosity at seeing her so early. Chloe returned the greeting, handing him the coffee. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Jake accepted it with a nod of thanks, setting it aside for a brief sip before turning back to her wheelchair, now gleaming under the garage's fluorescent lights. As he polished the smooth, customized frame, Chloe watched quietly, appreciating the way he treated even the smallest details with care and respect. She realized that in this place, surrounded by tools, metal, and machinery, she felt free in a way she hadn't for months. The wheelchair was more than a machine. It symbolized independence, agency, and a small but significant reclaiming of her life. As the morning wore on, Chloe began speaking, tentatively at first. "Yesterday, you didn't just fix my wheelchair," she said, her gaze meeting Jake's. "You gave me a sense of control again, a small part of me that I thought was gone." Jake paused, considering her words, and nodded with quiet understanding. "I just did what I could," he replied humbly, brushing the rag across the chair one more time. "Sometimes the little things matter more than we think." Chloe's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. She felt relief in speaking aloud her feelings, unguarded, with someone who didn't judge her by her wealth or status. As they continued, Chloe's stories unfolded naturally. She spoke of the challenges of living as a billionaire's daughter, of the constant scrutiny of people treating her as an object or a trophy rather than an individual. She described her isolation after the accident, the loneliness of navigating the world from a wheelchair, and the longing for authentic connection, someone who could see her true self beyond her wealth and social standing. Jake listened intently, offering empathy without judgment. He shared pieces of his own life too, the struggles of growing up with little, working long hours to keep the garage afloat, and his dreams of opening a larger workshop someday. In this exchange, a bond began forming, subtle yet undeniable, built on shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Unbeknownst to Jake, Chloe's absence from the expected schedule had not gone unnoticed. Alexander Morgan, 45, Chloe's father and a billionaire businessman, had always kept a protective eye on his daughter. From his office in the skyscraper overlooking Los Angeles, he had tracked her activities through cameras and her communication devices, primarily out of concern. When he discovered that she had been visiting a modest garage on the outskirts of the city and had formed a friendship with a young mechanic, Alexander's initial reaction was shock and disbelief. The idea of his daughter interacting so casually with someone far removed from her world unsettled him. His protective instincts wrestled with curiosity, prompting him to investigate further. Alexander drove to the garage later that day, the sleek black SUV gliding smoothly along the city streets. As he pulled into the parking area, he observed from a distance. Chloe and Jake were talking animatedly, laughter occasionally escaping Chloe's lips, a sound her father rarely heard in his daughter's professional circles. Alexander felt a strange mixture of apprehension and intrigue. The young man seemed genuine, his care and patience evident in every motion. Alexander's mind raced as he considered how someone so unassuming could impact his daughter in such a profound way. He realized that wealth, influence, and power had never been able to bring her the freedom and joy that this mechanic had effortlessly provided. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Chloe and Jake continued their conversation. Oblivious to the approaching observer, Jake demonstrated a few modifications he had added overnight: a smoother joystick movement, reinforced wheels, and subtle adjustments for better posture support. Chloe's eyes lit up as she tested each new feature, spinning gently and maneuvering with newfound confidence. "This is amazing," she whispered, exhilarated by the sense of control. Jake chuckled softly. "I just wanted to make sure you could feel safe and independent," he said. "No one should feel trapped in a chair, not when they're capable of so much." As they shared these moments, Chloe realized how much she valued the simplicity of Jake's world. There were no high-pressure meetings, no boardroom politics, no judgments about appearances. Here she was simply herself, a young woman reclaiming autonomy, conversing with someone who genuinely cared. And for Jake, Chloe's presence brought an unexpected sense of purpose and inspiration. The workbench, the grease, and the tools became a stage for something far greater than mechanics. It became a space where human connection and mutual respect flourished. Alexander, still watching from the shadows, finally stepped forward, clearing his throat as he entered the garage. Chloe looked up in surprise, and Jake straightened instantly, recognizing the weight of the moment. Alexander's gaze swept over the repaired wheelchair, then at Jake. "So this is the young man my daughter insists on visiting?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. Jake nodded respectfully, extending a hand. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to help her. That's all." Alexander scrutinized him for a moment, then softened, noticing the sincerity in his eyes. "I can see that," he replied quietly, acknowledging that wealth and status were irrelevant here. What mattered was the young man's character, patience, and kindness. The day stretched on as father, daughter, and mechanic shared quiet conversation. Alexander asked questions, not intrusive but sincere, about Jake's background, his motivations, and his dreams. Chloe smiled, witnessing the bridge forming between the two men, a connection that transcended class and circumstance. She realized that the simple act of fixing a wheelchair had rippled outward, creating bonds she had never anticipated. In Jake, she found a friend and confidant. In Alexander, she found understanding and a recognition that kindness, rather than wealth or status, could shape her life in profound ways. By late afternoon, Chloe maneuvered her upgraded wheelchair around the garage one last time, her movements smooth and confident. She looked at Jake, eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you. Not just for the chair, but for everything," she said softly. Jake smiled, brushing grease from his hands. "You're welcome," he replied simply. "I'm glad I could help," Alexander observed, understanding that true value isn't measured in money or influence, but in the way people impact each other's lives. As Chloe departed, she felt lighter, freer, and more hopeful than she had in months. Jake returned to his bench, quietly proud of the work he had done, not just repairing a chair, but restoring a sense of autonomy and trust. Alexander, too, left the garage that day with a newfound respect for this young man who had changed his daughter's perspective and lifted her spirit. The bond formed in that small, sunlit garage, amidst tools, grease, and conversation was unexpected but undeniable. Chloe had begun to reclaim her independence and confidence. Jake had discovered a purpose that extended beyond the mechanics of repair, and Alexander had learned that sometimes stepping outside preconceived notions of wealth and status could lead to moments of profound understanding. From that day forward, their lives were subtly yet irrevocably intertwined. What began as a simple act of repair had blossomed into a story of trust, hope, and human connection, proving that compassion and skill could bridge worlds previously thought far apart. The morning sun gleamed over Los Angeles, scattering gold across the quiet suburban streets as Alexander Morgan, 45, billionaire and father, drove his sleek black SUV toward Jake Carter's modest garage. Beside him sat Chloe, 26, his daughter, her upgraded wheelchair moving smoothly across the seat as she glanced toward the workshop with a mixture of excitement and pride. The past few weeks had been a revelation for Chloe, who had discovered a rare sense of freedom in the hands of the young mechanic, Jake, 24. Today, Alexander intended to meet this young man who had quietly captured his daughter's admiration and trust, and perhaps his own respect. Alexander's mind raced with curiosity and caution, wondering what kind of person had the courage, humility, and skill to make such an impact on Chloe. He had always been protective, always measured, and always wary of strangers who approached his daughter. But today felt different. He sensed something extraordinary awaiting him at the garage. As the SUV rolled to a stop in front of the garage, the small bell over the door chimed softly. Chloe wheeled herself out first, her movements confident, the joystick responding flawlessly to her touch. She felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. This visit was no longer just about the wheelchair. It was about bridging worlds, about showing her father that the choice she had made to trust Jake was not reckless, but wise. Alexander stepped out of the vehicle, his tailored suit contrasting sharply with the oil-stained walls, the smell of grease, and the cluttered tools inside the garage. Yet even as he stepped closer, he felt a sense of curiosity soften his usual strict demeanor. Perhaps this young man was more than a mere mechanic. Perhaps he had qualities that money and power could never buy. Inside the garage, Jake was busy polishing the wheelchair, adjusting the final components to ensure Chloe could maneuver perfectly. He glanced up as the SUV door shut and saw Alexander approaching, his posture rigid but observant. Jake straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, trying to appear confident despite the subtle tension in the air. Chloe smiled at both of them, sensing the unspoken caution in her father's gaze. "Dad," she said softly, "this is Jake. He's the one who made all this possible." She gestured toward her wheelchair, which now gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its custom features subtly enhanced for better support and agility. Alexander's eyes swept over the chair, then at Jake. For a brief moment, he studied the young man's appearance. Casual clothes, hands slightly rough from work, a faint sheen of grease across his palms, but there was something in his calm, steady demeanor that made Alexander pause. This was not a man seeking attention or reward. He had simply acted out of skill, care, and genuine concern. "So you're the young man my daughter has been spending her time with," Alexander said, his voice steady yet curious. Jake nodded politely, offering a handshake. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to help Chloe. I didn't expect anything in return." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly at the humility, a trait he rarely encountered in his circles of influence. Chloe wheeled herself closer to Jake, a protective yet proud expression on her face. "Dad, Jake didn't just fix my chair," she explained softly. "He gave me independence again. For the first time in months, I felt like I could move on my own. Like I mattered outside of money and status." Alexander's gaze softened, the tension in his shoulders easing as he looked at Chloe's bright, earnest eyes. He realized the depth of what Jake had done. It wasn't just a mechanical repair. It was a restoration of confidence, dignity, and joy. Jake, standing beside Chloe, felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. He had only intended to help. He had not anticipated the presence of her father, let alone the intensity of his scrutiny. Yet as he looked at Alexander, he met a gaze that was no longer judgmental but intrigued, a silent acknowledgement of the young mechanic's worth. I'm grateful for what you've done for my daughter," Alexander finally said, his voice softening. "It's not often I meet someone who can give more than money ever could." Jake nodded humbly. "I just wanted to help. That's all," he replied. The air between them shifted as Alexander stepped closer, examining the wheelchair in more detail. He noticed the custom modifications, the reinforced frame, and the subtle engineering improvements that allowed Chloe greater mobility and comfort. Each adjustment spoke volumes of Jake's skill, patience, and thoughtfulness. Alexander realized that his daughter's laughter, her lightness of spirit, and the independence she now displayed were gifts that no amount of wealth could have bought. Chloe, observing her father's changing demeanor, felt a surge of relief. She had feared judgment or disapproval, but instead, she saw respect forming where skepticism had once stood. For the next hour, father, daughter, and mechanic conversed casually, discussing the intricacies of the wheelchair, Jake's process, and Chloe's renewed confidence. Alexander asked questions not as an authority figure, but as a curious observer, eager to understand how a young man from a modest background could impact his daughter so profoundly. Jake shared the inspiration behind each modification, the challenges he had faced in ensuring functionality, and the joy he felt in seeing Chloe maneuver the chair with ease. Chloe chimed in, recounting her initial doubts and how each day spent in the garage had built trust and camaraderie. As the morning turned to afternoon, Alexander found himself reflecting on the meaning of wealth, success, and influence. He realized that despite his fortune, he had never been able to offer Chloe the kind of genuine care, respect, and freedom that Jake had provided. The young mechanic had shown patience where money could not, humility where power often overshadowed empathy, and skill that transformed not just a chair, but a life. Chloe's eyes, bright with gratitude, confirmed Alexander's realization. Jake had given her something far more valuable than material comfort. He had given her independence, confidence, and hope. Finally, Alexander extended a hand to Jake, this time with warmth and genuine acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the chair, but for reminding me what really matters. You've changed my daughter's life, and in doing so, you've shown me the value of humility and kindness." Jake shook his hand firmly, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. "I just wanted to help." "I'm glad it made a difference." Chloe, beaming between them, felt a rare sense of harmony. Her worlds, the luxury and expectations of her father's realm, and the simplicity and sincerity of Jake's life, had intersected in the most meaningful way. As the day ended, Chloe wheeled herself outside, the upgraded chair responding perfectly to her movements. She looked at Jake with admiration and gratitude, silently acknowledging that he had changed her life. Alexander stood nearby, silently reflecting on the humility and care of a young man who had not only helped his daughter, but had reminded him of the human capacity for kindness beyond wealth and social barriers. The garage, once an ordinary space filled with tools and oil, had transformed into a symbol of connection, trust, and life-altering compassion. From that day forward, the lives of Chloe, Jake, and Alexander became intertwined in ways none of them had anticipated. Chloe continued to visit the garage, enjoying the simple joys of independence and conversation. Jake's reputation as a skilled and compassionate mechanic grew, not just for his talent, but for his character. Alexander, witnessing the profound effects of genuine kindness, reevaluated his own approach to life, realizing that wealth could never replace authenticity, patience, and empathy. In the weeks that followed, the three formed a bond that bridged worlds and expectations. Chloe thrived with her newfound independence and confidence. Jake discovered a purpose beyond his small garage, and Alexander learned that humility and human connection were priceless gifts. Together, they demonstrated that compassion, patience, and the willingness to help without expectation could transform lives in ways no one could predict. The humble garage had become more than a workplace. It had become a sanctuary of trust, hope, and enduring human connection, forever altering the destinies of a billionaire, his daughter, and a young mechanic.